I do not dream of stars. To a soul such as mine, the celestial bodies are not beacons of distant hope, but embers in a sea of cosmic predators, each point of light a potential gateway for a hunger that has no name. I remember a time when I looked up at the night sky from the rust-stained balcony of our hab unit and saw patterns, saw the mythic figures my father had traced with a trembling, soot-covered finger. The 5 warriors, the Emperor's hand. Now I see only the thinnest of veils, a flimsy sheet of parchment behind which an infinity of teeth and claws and hateful intellects press, scraping, searching for the slightest tear. My name was Jurian. I think it was Jurian. The sound of it is like a word in a language I no longer speak, a relic from a forgotten civilization that happens to be my own. They took my name, and then they took my eyes, and then they took the world that those eyes saw. What I am now has no name, for a tool does not require one. I am a focus, a lens, a vessel through which the agonizing light of the master of mankind is permitted to shine, not to illuminate, but to burn. The air I breathe tastes of recycled ozone, filtered lubricants, and the faint, coppery tang of collective, unspoken fear. This small chamber, this sanctum of plasteel and iron, is my universe. The heavy, psychically dampened collar around my neck is my constant companion, a cold reminder of the leash that holds me back from the abyss, and the precipice upon which I have been forced to build my life. It is not a life. It is a state of function, a duty cycle. And it began not with a bang, not with a grand revelation of power, but with a simple, childish cruelty and the curdling of a bowl of milk. I was a child on a world whose designation I can no longer recall. A number and a letter in a subsector registry that has likely been scoured from existence a dozen times over by war or bureaucratic error. It was a hive world. Of course, it is always a hive world. A place of endless metal canyons and perpetual twilight, where the only sun was the jaundiced glow of nutrient vapor lamps and the distant, impossible light of the spire tops, where the true humans lived. We were the underdwellers, the foundation stones of the great imperial project. 1 billion lives lived and spent in the clangor of manufactorums and the hiss of atmospheric processors. My father worked the smelting lines, his body a testament to the slow, grinding erosion of hard labor. My mother stitched uniforms for a guard regiment that was forever recruiting and forever being shipped off-world to die. Ours was a life measured in bells and shift changes, in the thinness of the ration stew, and the rarity of a moment's silence. It was in that oppressive, manufactured silence, in the brief hours between the end of my father's shift and the start of my mother's, that it first happened. We had a pet, a small, scuttling thing from the lower sumps that resembled a rat with too many legs. My brother, younger than I by 2 years, had cornered it. He was not a cruel boy by the standards of the hive, but childhood in such a place is a lesson in casual brutality. He held a shard of sharpened metal, a piece of scrap from the factorum floor. He was enjoying the creature's terror. I felt it, not as an emotion, but as a taste, a sour, metallic tang at the back of my throat. I told him to stop. My voice was a child's voice, thin and reedy. He laughed, and as he laughed, I felt a knot of something hot and angry tighten in my gut. I stared at the bowl of synth milk on the table, the one he had been about to drink. I wanted it to spoil. I wanted to ruin his small pleasure, to answer his small cruelty with one of my own. I did not know what I was doing. It was a wish, a pure, unthinking, childish desire for retaliation. The milk didn't just spoil. It flash-boiled, hissing and spitting, then instantly froze into a cracked, yellow-white shard of ice. My brother stared, his mouth agape. The metal shard fell from his fingers, clattering on the grime-caked floor. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a new kind of fear, a fear that was not for a sumprat, but for me. That was the first whisper. The first time the universe had bent to my will without my permission. I did not understand it then, but I had just screamed my existence into a dimension that is always, always listening. And in that moment, the thing that I was, the potential I carried like a genetic disease, had just taken its first breath. My life, the simple, grinding, predictable life of a hive dweller, had just ended. I simply did not know it yet. That incident with the milk was a stone cast into the stagnant pool of our lives, and the ripples spread in ways I could not comprehend. My brother never spoke of it, but the way he looked at me changed forever. He would leave a wider berth when passing me in our cramped hab unit. He stopped trying to steal my rations. There was a distance, a new and terrible respect that was indistinguishable from fear. It was my first lesson in the isolation that my nature would bring. I tried to forget it, to dismiss it as a strange fluke, a trick of the chem-heavy air. But the universe, having been touched, now seemed to touch back. I started to hear things, not with my ears, but in the quiet spaces of my mind. At first, it was just a faint static, like the sound of a voxcaster tuned between frequencies. But slowly, the static resolved into whispers. They were not words, not in any language I knew, but pure emotion, raw and unfiltered, bleeding through the walls of reality from the minds of the millions packed around me. I could feel the dull, aching fatigue of the shift workers in the transport tube below our floor. I could taste the bitter resentment of the woman across the hall whose son had been taken for the guard. I could feel the gnawing, desperate hunger of 1,000 souls crying out for a little more food, a little more warmth, a little more life. It was a constant, suffocating tide of misery, and I was drowning in it. My own thoughts became a small island in a vast and stormy sea of other people's feelings. My own sadness was magnified 100-fold by the sorrow of my neighbors. My own fleeting anger could be fanned into a raging inferno by the hatred of a stranger in the corridor. I was losing my edges, my sense of self dissolving into the collective consciousness of the hive. Sleep offered no respite. My dreams became vivid, terrifying landscapes. I walked through cities of crumbling bone, under skies of weeping fire. I heard voices that promised me knowledge, that promised me power, that promised me an end to the loneliness. They showed me things, terrible and beautiful things. I saw the birth of stars and the death of galaxies. I saw armies of metal men marching in perfect synchronicity, their footfalls shaking the foundations of reality. I saw a golden giant, a figure of impossible light and sorrow, seated upon a throne of intricate machinery, his face a mask of endless, silent agony. I would wake up screaming. The images burned into the backs of my eyelids, my small cot soaked in a cold sweat. My parents grew worried. I became withdrawn, sullen. I couldn't explain what was happening. How could I tell them that I could hear our neighbor, old Manellis, dreaming of the green fields of a world he'd been forced to leave 50 years ago? How could I tell them that the foreman at my father's manufactorum was nursing a secret venomous hatred for his superior? A hatred so potent, it felt like a physical pressure against my skull. To speak of such things was to invite the worst kind of attention. Everyone knew the stories, the tales of witches, of psychers, of those whose minds were open to the horrors of the warp. They were cautionary tales told to frighten children, but with an undercurrent of genuine terror. Such people were aberrations, cancers on the body of humanity, and they were to be reported, to be purged. And so I kept my silence, and the pressure built. The whispers from the others, the people of the hive, were a torment. But a new sound was beginning to intrude, a different kind of whisper. It did not come from the minds of my fellow humans. It came from elsewhere. It was subtle at first, a sibilant hiss at the edge of hearing, a suggestion in the hum of the ventilation systems, a hidden word in the scream of the factorum sirens. These new whispers were seductive. Where the thoughts of the hive were a cacophony of pain and despair, These voices offered understanding. They offered a release. They knew my secret. They knew my fear. And they promised me a way to control it, to master it, to turn my curse into a gift. They were lies, of course. All of it. They were the hooks of the fisherman, cast into the river of souls, baited with whatever a desperate mind most craved, and I was beginning to starve. The breaking point, when it came, was as sordid and meaningless as everything else in the underhive. It was a dispute over a water ration. Water was life, more precious than thrones or favor. The public cisterns were strictly regulated. The lines were long, and tempers were short. A man, burly and scarred from factorum accidents, accused my mother of taking more than her share. He was wrong, but in the hive, being right was a luxury few could afford. He shoved her. She stumbled, falling against the rusted metal wall, the precious canister of water clattering to the ground and spilling its contents into a hungry grate. I was there. I saw the casual cruelty in his eyes, the satisfaction he took in his petty display of power, and I felt it. Not just my own flash of protective rage for my mother, but the man's own seething well of bitterness. I felt his self-loathing, his misery at his own pathetic life, a life where the only power he could wield was against a woman in a waterline. I felt the weary resignation of the others in the queue, too afraid or too tired to intervene. All of it flooded into me, a tidal wave of wretchedness, and it mixed with the whispers from the other place, the ones that promised power, the ones that urged me to times act asterisk. You don't have to be weak, they hissed in the back of my mind. You can make him feel what you feel. Make them all feel. The man raised his hand to strike my mother again, and I screamed. It was not a sound made with my throat. It was a silent, psychic shriek that erupted from the core of my being. It was a raw, undisciplined blast of pure emotion, my fear, my rage, the hive's despair, all of it weaponized. For a single, eternal moment, everyone in that dank, cavernous cistern felt what I felt. They felt the claustrophobia of a billion souls packed into a can of steel. They felt the sting of the acid rain on their skin, the ache of their weary bones, the hollowness in their bellies. They felt the crushing weight of a galaxy that did not care if they lived or died. But the man who had pushed my mother, he got the worst of it. I had focused on him, and the torrent of psychic filth I had unleashed poured directly into his mind. His eyes went wide, not with anger but with a sudden, profound, and absolute horror. He saw what I saw in my nightmares. He saw the city of bone. He heard the promises of the laughing gods. His mind, unprepared and unprotected, shattered like glass. He began to scream, a real physical scream of utter madness, clawing at his own face, his fingernails digging bloody furrows in his skin. He babbled about weeping skies and thrones of pain before his legs gave out and he collapsed, twitching and foaming at the mouth. Silence descended. The people in the line, moments before a picture of dull apathy, now stared at me. Their own brief, forced empathy had vanished, replaced by a primal terror. They didn't understand what had happened. Not precisely, but they understood the source. They saw me, a scrawny boy, standing over the gibbering wreck of a man twice my size. They saw the impossible, and in the lexicon of the Imperium, impossible has only one name: witch, someone whispered. The word was a lit match in a room full of explosives. It spread like fire. Witch, freak, mutant. The fear in their eyes curdled into a righteous, sanctified hatred. This was something they could understand. A clear enemy, a scapegoat for all their misery. The mob turned. My mother, bless her forgotten soul, grabbed my arm and pulled me away, her face a mask of terror. We ran. We ran through the warren of tunnels and corridors that I had called home, but every shadow now seemed to hold a threat. Every familiar face was twisted into a mask of accusation. We didn't get far. The local enforcers, brutish thugs in battered carapace armor, were alerted. The charge was not assault, It was not disturbing the peace. It was witchcraft, a capital crime. They cornered us in a dead-end conduit, the air thick with the stench of chemical runoff. My mother tried to shield me, to plead with them. They clubbed her aside without a second thought. I felt the crack of her bones as a spike of white-hot agony in my own mind. That was when the true horror began. As they advanced on me, their minds were open books of crude, violent intent. And the other whispers, the ones from beyond, surged forward, offering me the power to save myself. Kill them, they purred. Break their minds as you did the other one. Show them what real power is. And I almost did. I could feel the power coiling in my gut again, a serpent of psychic energy ready to strike. But as I looked at the enforcers, I saw not just their hatred, but also their fear. I felt their simple, brutish devotion to the order they served, their terror of the unknown, their absolute conviction that I was a thing of evil that needed to be destroyed. They were cogs in the machine, just like my father, just like everyone else. In that moment of hesitation, that flicker of empathy, my chance was lost. A heavy, weighted net flew through the air, and I was entangled. It was not an ordinary net. The fibers were woven with microscopic psychoconductive filaments that sizzled against my skin and sent a jolt of disruptive energy through my nervous system. The burgeoning power in my gut collapsed, turning into a wave of nausea and pain. They dragged me out, kicking and struggling, through the jeering crowds. They spat at me. They threw refuse. These were my people, the ones whose quiet desperation I had felt my entire life. And now, they hated me with a religious fervor. I was no longer one of them. I was a monster. They threw me into a holding cell, a small, dark box reeking of misery. I never saw my parents again. I do not know if they were punished for harboring me, or if they were simply swallowed back into the anonymous mass of the hive. For all I know, they were executed for the crime of my birth. It is a mercy that I cannot remember their faces clearly anymore. To do so would be to invite a pain that even I, after all I have endured, could not bear. My life as a human being was over. My journey into the dark had begun. I languished in that cell for a period I could not measure. Time in the dark is a fluid thing, stretching and compressing, marked only by the infrequent clanging of a food slot and the delivery of a tasteless nutrient paste. The whispers were my only constant companions. Without the buffer of a million other minds, the voices from the warp grew louder, more insistent. They were my tormentors and my only solace. They showed me visions of escape, of revenge. They showed me the enforcers who had captured me dying in agony, their bodies twisted into impossible shapes. They showed me the hive, my home, consumed by a cleansing fire that I commanded. These visions were seductive, a balm for my wounded pride and my terror. They were poison, and I drank of them deeply. My power, untutored and volatile, began to leak out. The iron walls of my cell would bead with moisture, then frost over even in the stifling heat of the detention block. The nutrient paste would sometimes writhe in its bowl, forming fleeting, screaming faces, before collapsing back into gray sludge. The guards learned to stay away. They would shove the food tray through the slot with a long pole, their faces averted, muttering prayers and wards under their breath. I was a contagion, a thing to be contained. I did not know what was to become of me. I assumed I would be executed. A bolt pistol to the head was the standard sentence for witches. I tried to make peace with that. But the Imperium is nothing if not efficient in its cruelties. My death would have been a waste. I was a resource, a raw material to be processed. I didn't know it, but my fate had already been decided. My name had been entered into a ledger, my rudimentary psychic evaluation logged, and my tithe assigned. I was bound for Holy Terra. The first sign that my fate was not to be a simple death came not as a person, but as a feeling. It was a profound and sudden silence. For the first time since my powers had awoken, the whispers in my head stopped. Not just the seductive voices from the Immaterium, but the background psychic noise of the hive itself. The constant press of a billion souls vanished, leaving a perfect, terrifying void. It was like being deafened. The silence was so absolute, so unnatural, that it was a torment in itself. It was a pressure, a crushing weight of nothingness. I curled into a ball on the cold floor, pressing my hands to my ears, trying to find a sound that wasn't there. Then came the footsteps. Heavy, rhythmic, and utterly without emotion. The door to my cell hissed open, revealing figures that were wrong in a way my childish mind could barely process. They were tall and slender, clad in baroque golden armor that seemed to absorb the light. Their faces were hidden behind ornate helms, but I knew, with a certainty that went deeper than sight, that they were women. But the most terrifying thing was the aura they projected. It was that silence, personified. They were the source of the psychic void. They were nulls, anathema, the sisters of silence. Behind them stood a man in the black uniform of an imperial proctor, his face a grim mask of duty. He held a data slate, and he read from it in a flat, monotone voice. By the authority of the Adeptus Terra, the unsanctioned Psyker designated 734 Gamma is hereby claimed for the Black Tithe. You will submit, you will obey. Your life is now forfeit to the service of the God Emperor of mankind. I had no power to resist. In their presence, my burgeoning psychic abilities were not just suppressed, they ceased to exist. I felt hollowed out, a mere shell of flesh and bone. The very part of me that made me a witch was gone, and its absence was an agony. One of the sisters stepped forward. She did not speak, but her intent was clear. She attached a heavy, metallic collar around my neck. It was cold, and I could feel complex circuitry humming within it. It was a psychic restraint, a portable version of the null field that surrounded her. They led me from my cell, through the corridors of the detention block. The guards and enforcers, who had once seemed so terrifying, now averted their gazes, their faces pale with awe and fear. They did not look at me. They looked at my escorts. I was no longer a common monster. I was the property of a higher, more frightening power. They took me to the surface. It was the first time in my life I had been above the median hive levels. I saw the sky. Not the true sky, not the black velvet sprinkled with stars I had only heard of, but the polluted, perpetual gray dome of the hive world's upper atmosphere. It was vast and terrifying, and the sheer scale of the hive city, stretching in every direction, a forest of metal and rockcrete, made me dizzy. We stood on a landing platform, the wind whipping at my thin prisoner's rags. A vessel was descending. It was not a ship. It was a block of obsidian darkness that blotted out the sky. It was a flying fortress, a cathedral of dread, its surfaces, devoid of windows or decoration, marked only with the stark black symbol of the Astra Telepathica, a black ship. The legends were true. This was the vessel that plied the stars, harvesting the psychic tithe from a million worlds. It was a prison ship, a laboratory, and a slaughterhouse all in one. Its forward ramp lowered with a deep groan of tortured metal, revealing a dark, cavernous interior. The silence from my escorts was a whisper compared to the psychic void that emanated from that ship's hold. It was the concentrated silence of 10,000 captured souls, a psychic black hole that promised nothing but oblivion. This was my destination. This was my doom. I was being taken from the only world I had ever known, to be delivered into the hands of the very people my nightmares had warned me of. I was a grain of wheat, harvested for the imperial mill, to be ground into flour for the emperor's table. As the silent sisters forced me up the ramp, into the chilling darkness of the ship, I took one last look at the gray, smog-choked sky of my home. I did not feel sadness. I did not feel loss. I felt only a profound and chilling emptiness. The boy I had been was dead. The thing that was left was cargo. The interior of the black ship was a monument to oppressive functionality. The air was cold and sterile, smelling of sanctified incense and the faint, metallic scent of ozone. The corridors were vast, cathedral-like structures of bare, black iron, lit by an unforgiving lumen-stripped glow that offered no warmth and cast no shadows. Every surface was inscribed with litanies of warding and purity seals, a constant, silent prayer against the very cargo the ship was designed to carry. The psychic dampening field was immense, a tangible presence that pressed in from all sides. It felt like being at the bottom of a deep ocean, the weight of the water crushing the air from your lungs. My own nascent psychic abilities, which had been a torment and a source of terror, were now just a dull, throbbing ache behind my eyes, a phantom limb that had been crudely amputated. The silent sisters guided me, their grip like iron, through hallways that echoed with the distant, rhythmic chanting of servitors and the hum of the ship's powerful engines. We passed no one else. The ship felt empty, a ghost vessel crewed by silence and machines. My destination was the hold. Not a single hold, but one of hundreds, a vast, tiered chamber that descended deep into the ship's belly. The scale of it was hard to process. It was a coliseum of despair. Thousands of figures, men, women, and children, were crammed onto the tiered levels, all clad in the same rough gray robes as me, all bearing the same collar of psychic suppression. They were the tithe, the psychic harvest of an entire subsector. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, of fear, of utter hopelessness. The moment I stepped into the chamber, away from the immediate, overwhelming null aura of the silent sisters, the psychic noise returned. But it was different now. It wasn't the vibrant, chaotic mess of the hive. This was a single, monolithic chord of pure, undiluted misery. It was the psychic emanation of 10,000 souls who knew they were damned. The despair was a physical force, a greasy film that coated the skin, a foul taste at the back of the throat. I was shoved onto one of the lower tiers, the gate clanging shut behind me with a sound of absolute finality. I stumbled and fell, and no one offered a hand. No one even looked at me. Each soul was an island, lost in their own private sea of terror. The people here were of all ages, from wizened old men who had hidden their curse for decades, to children younger than I had been when the milk curdled, their eyes wide and vacant with trauma. Some sat silently, rocking back and forth, their lips moving in silent prayer or madness. Others lay in catatonic states, their minds having already shattered under the strain. A few stared up at the distant armored ceiling, their faces etched with a desperate, futile hope for a rescue that would never come. There were no guards inside the hold itself. None were needed. The collars and the ship's pervasive dampening field kept our powers suppressed. And besides, where would we go? We were 1,000,000 miles from anywhere, trapped in a cage within a cage. The days, if they could be called that, blended into one another. The lumen strips would dim slightly to simulate a night cycle, but there was no real rest. Sleep was a gateway to nightmares. And here, in this concentration of psychic potential, the dreams of 10,000 souls bled into one another. We dreamt a collective dream of fire and blood, of laughing thirsty gods, and a silent golden emperor in eternal pain. We would wake with the screams of our neighbors echoing in the cavernous space. Food was a gray, nutrient-rich slurry, dispensed from nozzles in the wall. Water was rationed. There was no conversation. To speak was to acknowledge our shared fate, and that was a burden too great to bear. We were strangers bound by a shared curse, a brotherhood of the damned. Occasionally, the silent sisters would enter the hold. Their arrival was always preceded by that wave of absolute psychic silence, a herald of their terrifying presence. They would walk the tiers, their faceless helms scanning the crowd. They were not looking for trouble. They were culling the herd. Sometimes they would point to an individual whose despair had curdled into a dangerous instability, or one whose powers were so potent they were beginning to strain against the dampening field. That person would be taken, and they would not return. We learned not to watch them go. We learned to make ourselves small, to project an aura of utter mediocrity, to be nothing more than another gray face in the crowd. It was my first true lesson in survival within the imperial machine. Do not be noticed. Be invisible. Be nothing. It was on that ship, in the belly of that beast, that I began to understand the sheer, terrifying scale of the Imperium. I was not a unique tragedy. I was a statistic. I was one of 10,000 on this ship, and there were 100 other ships just like it, plying the infinite void, each one laden with a similar cargo of broken souls. We were a resource, as vital to the Imperium as promethium or iron ore. We were the fuel, the ammunition, the raw material for the great and terrible works of the Emperor. My personal history, my family, my pathetic little life in the hive, it was all meaningless. It was the backstory of a single drop of water in a vast and stormy ocean. This realization did not bring peace. It brought a new and more profound kind of horror. It was the horror of insignificance. I was nothing, and I was being transported to the center of everything, to Holy Terra, to be consumed by a machine so vast and so ancient that it beggared comprehension. The journey took years. I grew from a boy into a gaunt, hollow-eyed adolescent. The memories of my home world began to fade, the faces of my parents blurring into indistinct shapes. The only reality was the ship, the gray robes, the nutrient paste, and the constant, crushing weight of 10,000 souls crying out in silence. We were being broken down, our individuality scoured away by monotony and despair, until all that was left was the raw, psychic potential that the Imperium so desperately needed and so utterly feared. The journey ended as it had begun, with a change in the deep, thrumming vibration of the ship's engines. A new sensation filtered through the hull, a sense of finality, of arrival. For the first time in years, there was a stirring among the silent masses in the hold. Heads lifted. Hope, that most stubborn and foolish of emotions, flickered in 1,000 pairs of eyes. We had arrived at Holy Terra, the cradle of humanity, the home of the God Emperor. Surely, here there would be salvation. Surely the Master of Mankind would not allow his faithful to suffer so. It was the delusion of the damned, a final, desperate prayer before the axe falls. We were herded from the holds, blinking in the unfamiliar light. It was not the light of a Sunday Terra, has no true sun, not for those who dwell on its surface. It was the perpetual, awe-inspiring, and terrifying glow of a world that is one single contiguous city. We stood on a docking platform, the size of a city from my homeworld, and it was dwarfed by the structures around it. Spires of impossible height pierced the smog-choked upper atmosphere, their peaks lost in the orbital haze. Statues of primarchs and saints, so vast they had their own weather systems, stared down with eyes of cold stone. The sheer scale of it was an act of violence against the senses. It was designed to crush the spirit, to remind every soul of their own utter insignificance before the majesty of the Imperium. The air itself was thick, tasting of incense, industrial pollutants, and the psychic residue of 1,000,000,000,000 souls who had lived and died on this sacred ground for 10,000 years. The psychic noise was overwhelming, a roar that made the cacophony of my home hive seem like a whisper. It was the collective mental voice of the throne world, a tapestry of devotion, fanaticism, bureaucracy, ambition, and a deep, planetary-wide fear. And beneath it all, a constant, basso profundo thrum of pure, unimaginable power. A psychic earthquake that had its epicenter at the heart of the planet, the Emperor. Even in my suppressed state, I could feel him. It was not a comforting presence. It was the feeling of standing at the base of a star, the sheer, raw power of it threatening to incinerate you, body and soul. This was not the benevolent savior of the imperial creed. This was a psychic god of immense, terrifying, and agonizing power. We were marched in long, silent columns, our gray robes a river of misery flowing through the grand canyons of the imperial palace. We were assets to be processed, inventory to be logged. We were taken to a fortress monastery that was our destination, our school, and our prison, the Scholastia Sicana. Its gates were wrought of blackened iron and decorated with screaming faces, a clear warning to all who entered. Within its walls, the air grew colder, the psychic dampening fields stronger, more refined. This was a place built to contain and control the power of the human mind. We were stripped of our robes, scrubbed raw with harsh chemicals, and given new uniforms, simple black tunics and trousers. Our names were formally taken from us. We were assigned a number. I was no longer Jurian, nor was I 734 Gamma. I was Neophyte 972. My identity had been reduced to a numerical designation. We were sorted. A series of tests, both mundane and esoteric, were administered by stern-faced drill abbots and silent, watchful proctors. They measured our intelligence, our physical resilience, our psychological stability, but the true tests were psychic. We were placed in chambers where the dampening fields were slowly lowered, allowing our powers to trickle back. They wanted to see the nature of our gifts, the strength of our will, the color of our souls. A man next to me, a gaunt telepath from a feral world, screamed as his mind was opened for the first time in years. The sudden influx of sensation, the raw touch of the warp, was too much. His eyes burst in a shower of blood, and his body began to convulse as something other than his own soul looked out from them. A pair of sisters of silence entered the chamber, and a blessed wave of nothingness washed over him. His body went limp, the otherworldly presence banished. They dragged his corpse away without a word. He had failed the first test. It was a lesson for us all. This was not a school to nurture our talents. It was a crucible designed to burn away the weak, the unstable, the unworthy. The goal was not to create powerful psychers. The goal was to create survivors. Survivors who could be controlled. The training began in earnest. It was a brutal, relentless regimen of physical hardship, mental conditioning, and doctrinal indoctrination. We were woken before the simulated dawn, forced on long runs through the fortress's catacombs, our bodies pushed to the breaking point. We were fed the same tasteless nutrient paste as on the ship. We were taught the vast and labyrinthine history of the Imperium, forced to memorize endless litanies and catechisms of hate. We learned of the great enemy, the daemon, the alien, the heretic. We were taught to fear the warp, to see it not as a source of power, but as a realm of pure, malevolent chaos that sought only to corrupt and consume. Our lessons in psychic control were exercises in pain and denial. We were taught to build walls in our minds, fortresses of faith and discipline to keep the whispers out. A drill abbot, a man whose face was a mass of scar tissue from a past psychic mishap, would walk the training halls, his staff of office crackling with a low-level power field. He would project thoughts into our minds, fear, doubt, temptation, and we were expected to resist. Failure to do so was punished instantly and painfully. A jolt of electricity from a disciplined collar, a lash from a psychic whip that left no mark on the skin but seared the soul. "The mind is a fortress," he would drone, his voice a harsh rasp. "Your will is its wall. Your faith is its foundation. Any crack, any weakness, will be exploited by the enemy. You are humanity's first and last line of defense. You are also its greatest potential weakness. You will be made strong, or you will be expunged." Day after day, month after month, the process continued. It was a systematic dismantling of the self. Our pasts were irrelevant. Our emotions were weaknesses. Our thoughts were potential betrayals. We were being remade, reforged in the fires of pain and fear into something the Imperium could use, a weapon. And like any weapon, we were considered utterly expendable. The attrition rate was staggering. Neophytes would vanish in the night. Some were taken by the black ships again, their potential deemed too low to be useful, but too high to be allowed to live. They were destined to fuel the Astronomicon, their souls to be burned as psychic kindling for the Emperor's light. Others broke, their minds shattered under the constant pressure, and they were handed over to the Adeptus Mechanicus to be lobotomized and rebuilt as mindless servitors. We would see them sometimes, their eyes vacant, their limbs replaced with machinery, performing menial tasks around the fortress. They were a walking, silent warning of the price of failure. The worst, however, were those who fell to the warp. Despite all the wards and the training, the fortress was still a beacon for the entities of the Immaterium. A moment of weakness, a lapse in concentration, was all it took. A neophyte's desperate cry for help would be answered not by the Emperor, but by something else. Their bodies would twist and contort. Their mouths would speak in forgotten tongues, and for a few terrifying moments, a piece of hell would manifest in our midst until the Sisters of Silence and the Grey Knight custodians arrived to purge it with flame and psychic force. I learned to survive. I pushed the memories of my family, of my home, into a small, locked box in the corner of my mind. I focused only on the present, the litanies, the exercises, the pain. I built my walls high. I learned to distinguish the whispers of the warp from the commands of my instructors. I learned to embrace the emptiness, to find a strange sort of peace in the stripping away of my own identity. I was becoming what they wanted me to be, disciplined, obedient, and empty. A perfect vessel, waiting to be filled with the Emperor's purpose. The Scholastia Psycana was not a place of learning. It was a factory of the soul. We were the raw iron ore, thrust into a furnace, beaten on an anvil, and quenched in the waters of dogma and pain. The goal was to shape us into a blade and to discard the slag. I saw so much slag. I saw a young woman from a noble house, her psychic gift, a gentle, empathic touch, who could soothe the wounded and calm the fearful. They tried to teach her to use it as a weapon, to inflict terror, to break the minds of her enemies. She refused. She could not bring herself to cause such pain. They labeled her insufficiently aggressive. One day her bed was empty. I later saw her working in the Medicae Bay, her eyes as vacant as a servitor's, her hands surgically replaced with gleaming, multi-jointed claws. Her empathic touch now used to perform brutal, pain-racked amputations without anesthetic. They had found a use for her, after all. The Imperium wastes nothing. I saw a man whose gift was pyrokinesis. He could conjure flame with a thought. In the training cages, he was a prodigy, weaving intricate patterns of fire, a master of his craft. But he was proud. He reveled in his power. He saw it as his own, not as a gift to be used in the Emperor's service. The drill abbots saw this pride as a fatal flaw, a gateway to corruption. They set him a task, to walk through a corridor of roaring Prometheum jets, using only his mind to shield himself, while reciting the litany of humility. He faltered for a second, his concentration broken by a flicker of arrogant self-assurance. The flames found him. His screams were a lesson to us all. On the dangers of ego, I learned the lesson well. I strove for mediocrity. I did not excel, but I did not fail. I completed my tasks with cold, detached efficiency. My psychic abilities, once a wild and terrifying torrent, were now a tightly controlled stream. I could erect a mental shield that could withstand the drill abbot's psychic probes. I could perform minor feats of telekinesis, levitating small objects with a precision that was more mechanical than magical. I became a model student by virtue of becoming a blank slate. The most grueling part of our education was the study of the warp. We were not just taught to fear it, we were forced to understand it, to gaze into the abyss so that we might recognize it when it gazed back. We were shown picked captures of demonic incursions, the images themselves carrying a taint that made the soul itch. We were forced to listen to vox recordings of heretical rites, the words a poison that tried to find purchase in the cracks of our minds. We studied the natures of the ruinous powers, learning their symbols, their temptations, their methods of corruption. It was like teaching a child about fire by forcing them to hold their hand over a lit candle. The goal was to build a tolerance to the pain, to sear the danger into our very being. The library of the Scholastia was a terrifying place. It contained tomes bound in human skin, their pages filled with the ravings of madmen and the whispers of things that should not be. To read them was to invite a kind of madness, and we were forced to study them for hours on end, our disciplined collars ready to deliver a punishing jolt if our biosigns indicated we were becoming too enthralled, too corrupted by the knowledge we consumed. Many lost their minds in that library, their sanity shredded by a single forbidden sentence or a cursed glyph. They would be found rocking in a corner, whispering a daemon's name over and over, and the Sisters of Silence would come to grant them the Emperor's peace. My own particular talent began to manifest during these sessions. It was not a flashy power like pyrokinesis or telepathy. It was subtler, and in many ways, more dangerous. I was a diviner. I could see the echoes of the past and the faint, shimmering possibilities of the future. I could touch an object and feel the emotions of those who had held it. I could look at a person and see the faint, ghostly trails of the paths they might walk. It was a treacherous gift. The past was a swamp of sorrow, and the future was a sea of infinite, terrifying possibilities. To look too closely was to be consumed by what was or what could be. The drill abbots took a special interest in this. Divination was a valuable tool for the Imperium. They pushed me harder. They brought me artifacts recovered from battlefields, a blood-stained chainsword, a shattered helmet, a heretic's profane icon, and forced me to divine their history. I felt the last moments of dying guardsmen. I experienced the fanatical devotion of a chaos cultist as a daemon tore its way into reality through his body. Each session left me shaking and vomiting, my mind reeling from the psychic residue of violence and horror. They were not teaching me to control my power. They were teaching me to endure it, to function despite the agony, to be a conduit for information no matter the cost to my own soul. The years bled into one another, a gray smear of pain, discipline, and indoctrination. I no longer thought of myself as Jurian. That name was a ghost, a forgotten myth. I was 972, a Psyker in training, a candidate for sanctioning. The locked box in my mind where I kept my past was sealed with rust and fear. To open it would be to destroy the fragile sanity I had so painstakingly constructed. I had a conversation once, a rare and forbidden thing. A young neophyte, his face still holding a ghost of youthful hope, whispered to me during a cleaning detail. "Do you ever wonder?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the scrape of our brushes on the stone floor. "If we will ever be free?" I did not look at him. I just kept scrubbing. "Freedom is a heresy," I replied, my voice the flat monotone of the catechisms we recited daily. "The only freedom is in service to the Emperor. The only truth is the imperial truth. The only hope is in sacrifice." He fell silent. The next day, he was gone. I do not know if he was taken for his moment of doubt or if I had been part of a test, my response recorded and judged. It did not matter. The outcome was the same. I had given the correct answer. I had survived another day. I had proven that I was becoming the perfect instrument, hollow, obedient, and utterly, irrevocably broken. The day of my sanctioning arrived without ceremony. There was no announcement, no grand assembly. One morning, after the meager pre-dawn meal, a proctor approached me as I stood in formation. He did not speak my designation. He simply placed a hand on my shoulder and led me away from the others. I did not look back. I knew what this meant. This was the final test, the culmination of my long and brutal education. The moment that would determine whether I became a tool of the Imperium or another offering for the Golden Throne. I was led deep into the fortress, to a section I had never seen before. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of ancient dust, sanctified oils, and a powerful, raw psychic energy that made the fillings in my teeth ache. The walls were no longer bare iron and rockcrete. They were covered in ancient, intricate script, wards and prayers, so potent they seemed to hum with a life of their own. We entered a vast circular chamber. In the center, there was a raised dais, and upon it, a throne-like chair made of dark, psycho-reactive metal, covered in a web of cables and crystalline conduits. This was the soul-binding apparatus. Standing around the chamber were figures of immense authority and power. Inquisitors in black power armor, their eyes glowing with a cold, analytical light. High-ranking members of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, their robes heavy with the seals of their office. And a trio of Grey Knight paladins, their Terminator armor a bulwark of silver and faith, their Nemesis force halberds humming with latent energy. They were the witnesses, the judges, and, if necessary, the executioners. I felt a tremor of what might have been fear, a faint echo of an emotion I had long since learned to suppress. I was stripped of my tunic and made to kneel before the dais. A tech priest, his flesh almost entirely replaced by whirring, clicking machinery, approached me. His mechadendrites uncoiled, attaching various sensors and needles to my body, monitoring my heart rate, my brain activity, my galvanic skin response. He did not speak in words, but in a stream of binary cant that only the other machines in the room seemed to understand. The proctor who had brought me here finally spoke, his voice booming in the cavernous space. Neophyte 972, you have completed your training. You have survived the crucible. You have been deemed worthy of the ultimate trial. You will undergo the ritual of sanctioning. Your soul will be bound to the light of the God Emperor. If you are pure, your mind will be fortified, your will made iron. You will become a holy instrument of His divine will. If there is any taint, any weakness, any shred of corruption within you, it will be burned away, and your soul will be scoured into oblivion. Do you accept this judgment? There was no choice. To refuse was to be declared a heretic and be struck down where I knelt. I accept, I said, my voice a dry whisper. I was guided to the chair. The cold metal seemed to suck the warmth from my body. A heavy, helmet-like device was lowered onto my head, its interior lined with 1,000 tiny psychic needles that pricked at my scalp. Restraints snapped shut over my wrists and ankles. I was a specimen, pinned and prepared for dissection. The tech priest made a final adjustment, and then the process began. I felt a surge of energy, a low hum that quickly rose in pitch to a piercing shriek. The crystalline conduits on the chair began to glow with a soft, golden light. That light flowed through the cables, into the helmet, and then into my mind. It was not a gentle process. It was an invasion. It felt as if a star was being born inside my skull. The psychic walls I had so carefully constructed, my fortresses of discipline and denial, were not bypassed. They were obliterated, blasted into dust by a wave of pure incandescent power. All the locked doors in my mind were kicked open. The little box where I kept the memories of my family, of Jurian, was shattered. For a moment I saw my mother's face, clear as day. Her eyes filled with terror. I felt the grime of the hive floor on my cheek. I tasted the synth milk. Then it was all burned away by the golden light. This was the first part of the trial, the scouring. My entire life, every memory, every thought, every secret shame and fleeting joy, was laid bare, examined by a consciousness so vast and so ancient it was beyond my comprehension. It was the Emperor's light, a sliver of his divine agonizing awareness, channeled through the arcane machinery of the Golden Throne and into me. It was a search for taint. It sifted through my soul, looking for any trace of warp corruption, any hint of heresy, any seed of doubt. The whispers from the other place, the ones that had haunted me for years, rose up to meet the light, hissing and spitting like water on hot iron. I felt them being burned away, their seductive lies turned to ash. But the light was not just a fire that cleansed. It was a fire that consumed. It burned away my fear, but it also burned away my love. It burned away my hatred, but it also burned away my hope. It was stripping me down to my very foundations, excising everything that made me an individual, everything that made me human. I screamed. The sound was trapped within my own mind, a silent, eternal shriek of a soul being unmade. I felt my sanity begin to fray, my sense of self dissolving into the golden inferno. This was the true test. Could I endure this? Could I maintain a core of identity, a single point of will, while the storm of the Emperor's soul raged through me? Or would I break, my mind shattering into a million pieces, leaving me a drooling, catatonic wreck? I clung to a single thought, the one thing that my training had hammered into me above all others: service. I am a tool. I have a purpose. My life is not my own. I am an instrument of His will. I did not fight the light. I did not resist it. I submitted to it. I opened myself to the fire and let it burn. I offered my soul up for judgment, not as a defendant, but as a sacrifice. And in that moment of absolute, unconditional surrender, something shifted. The fire did not recede, but it changed its nature. It was no longer just a scouring flame. It became a forge. It began to rebuild what it had torn down. It reforged my will, not as my own, but as a reflection of His. It imprinted upon my soul the symbol of the Imperium, a brand that would mark me forever. It was a psychic restructuring, a rewriting of my spiritual DNA. The process was agonizing, but I endured. I was no longer screaming. I was accepting. A strange, cold peace settled over me. The pain was still there, a constant, thrumming agony at the core of my being. But it was a holy pain, a purposeful pain. It was the pain of the Emperor himself, and I was now privileged to share a microscopic fraction of it. When the light finally receded and the machine powered down, I was not the same being who had sat in the chair. The boy from the hive, Jurian, was gone forever, his memory a ghost in a burned-out house. Neophyte 972 was also gone, a designation for a larval state that no longer existed. What was left was something new, something forged, something sanctioned. The restraints retracted. I stood up from the chair, my movements stiff. I looked at the Inquisitors and the Grey Knights. I saw them not just with my eyes, but with my new, refined senses. I could feel the cold certainty of their faith. I could sense the centuries of war and duty etched into their souls. The Inquisitor in the lead, a man with a face like a hawk and eyes like chips of obsidian, stepped forward. He looked me up and down, his gaze penetrating, searching for any flaw. "What is your purpose?" he asked, his voice a blade of honed steel. "To serve," I replied. My voice was different, deeper, resonant with a power that was not entirely my own. To obey, to sacrifice. I am the Emperor's will made manifest. I am his weapon against the darkness. The Inquisitor nodded, a flicker of something that might have been approval in his cold eyes. "So be it," he said. "Welcome to the endless war, Psyker. My new life, my true life, as an instrument of the Imperium, began immediately. There was no recovery period, no time for reflection. The machine that had unmade and remade me was a factory, and I was a finished product, ready to be shipped to the front lines. My official designation was Primaris Psyker, a rank that carried with it both immense power and a death sentence. I was assigned to Acadian Shock Trooper Regiment, a unit renowned for its grim discipline and its proximity to the Eye of Terror. I was to be their weapon, their shield against the horrors of the warp that so often accompanied the armies of chaos. My arrival at the regiment's staging ground on a desolate moon was met with a mixture of awe and revulsion. The common soldiers of the Imperial Guard are taught from birth to hate and fear the witch. To them, I was a necessary evil, a tame monster kept on a leash, a bomb that could go off at any moment. They called me witch or spark head in hushed, fearful whispers when they thought I wasn't listening. They made the sign of the Aquila when I passed. They would not meet my gaze. I did not care. Their feelings were irrelevant. I was not there to be their friend. I was there to do my duty. I was given a new uniform, the black fatigues of the Scholastia Sicana, replaced with the standard guard flak armor, though mine was adorned with symbols of my office. The winged skull of the Astra Telepathica, and numerous purity seals. I was also given my war gear, a las pistol, a symbol of my integration into the guard, though it felt like a child's toy compared to the power I now wielded. And my force, staff. It was a meter-long rod of psychoconductive alloy, topped with a winged eagle, its eyes tiny, perfectly cut gemstones. It was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It was an amplifier, a focusing tool for my psychic energies. When I held it, I could feel the thrum of latent power, a hungry, waiting energy that mirrored the power within myself. The greatest change, however, was the absence of the collar. For the first time since my capture, the psychic dampening device was removed. The sudden influx of the raw, unfiltered Immaterium was staggering. It was like living in a soundproof room your entire life, and then suddenly being thrown into the middle of a screaming, chaotic rock concert. The whispers were back, 1,000,000 times louder than before. The temptations, the promises of power, the lies of the ruinous gods. They were a constant, roaring torrent against the walls of my mind. But now, I had the strength to resist. The soul binding had turned my mind into a fortress, and the Emperor's light was a beacon that burned atop its highest tower. The whispers of the warp were like waves crashing against a cliff of granite. They could batter, they could erode, but they could not break me. It was a constant, exhausting battle. A war fought every second of every day within the confines of my own skull. My first deployment was to a world on the edge of the Cadian Gate, a festering planet of toxic swamps and ruined cities, where a chaos cult had taken root. The fighting was brutal and close quarters. The guardsmen I was attached to were grim-faced veterans, their faith as hard and unyielding as their flak armor. They fought with disciplined volleys of las fear and the cold steel of their bayonets. I fought with the fire in my soul. I remember the first time I truly unleashed my power in combat. We were pinned down in a ruined cathedral by a group of cultists, their bodies twisted and marked with the symbols of their dark gods. They were chanting in a guttural language that made the air curdle, and a shimmering, multicolored portal was beginning to tear open in the fabric of reality behind them. The air grew cold, and the guardsmen around me began to falter, their courage failing in the face of this unnatural horror. The company commissar, a man with a jaw of iron and a soul to match, looked at me. He did not speak. He simply nodded. It was my time. I stepped forward, raising my force staff. I closed my physical eyes and opened my psychic sense. I saw the cultists not as men, but as puppets, their souls infested with the filth of the warp. I saw the portal not as a tear in reality, but as a bleeding wound, and from it I could feel the predatory hunger of the things that waited on the other side. I reached deep inside myself, to the core of my being, where the Emperor's light had been branded onto my soul. I gathered my will, my discipline, my pain, and I gave it voice. "In the Emperor's name," I bellowed, and my voice was more than just sound. It was a psychic shockwave. A bolt of pure golden lightning erupted from the head of my staff. It did not just burn the cultists it struck, it annihilated them, body and soul. Their physical forms were turned to ash, and their corrupted spirits were scoured from existence. The portal wavered, the unholy energies that sustained it disrupted by the purity of my attack. I did not stop. I became a conduit, a living channel for the righteous fury of the master of mankind. Bolts of soul fire streamed from my fingertips. I created a kinetic shield around my comrades, deflecting the cultists' crude autogun bullets with shimmering walls of force. I reached into the minds of their leaders, not with a subtle touch, but with a brutal, psychic hammer blow, shattering their sanity and turning them into screaming, pathetic wrecks. When it was over, I stood amidst the smoking remains of the enemy, my body trembling with the sheer effort of it, blood trickling from my nose and ears. The surviving guardsmen stared at me, their fear now mixed with a new, grudging respect. I had saved them, but I had done so by unleashing the very power they had been taught to despise. I was their monster, their witch, but I was on their side. And in that moment, I understood my purpose with a clarity that was both terrifying and sublime. I was not a man. I was a weapon system. My life was a resource to be expended. My soul was ammunition to be fired, and I would continue to fire, again and again, until I was spent, a burnt-out shell, another forgotten casualty in a war that will never, ever end. The years that followed became a blur of mud, blood, and warp fire. I moved from one war zone to another, a ghost in the machine of the Astra Militarum. I fought on frozen death worlds, where the very air crystallized in your lungs, and in the sweltering, toxic jungles of plague-ridden planets. I battled the brutish green-skinned orcs, their collective psychic field, a crude, boisterous roar in my mind. I faced the insidious gene-stealer cults, their hive-mind consciousness, a subtle, creeping poison that sought to turn brother against brother. I stood against the elegant, soulless constructs of the Necrons, their alien minds a terrifying blankness in the warp, a void more frightening than any daemon. But the true enemy, the eternal enemy, was always chaos. The forces of the arch-enemy were a cancer on the galaxy, and I was the surgeon's scalpel, the cauterizing flame. I fought against the blood-crazed legions of Khorne, their minds a simple, unending scream for slaughter. My task there was to erect psychic barriers, to blunt their mindless charges, to protect my comrades from the sheer, overwhelming rage that they projected. I faced the manipulative, ever-shifting armies of Tziench, where the battlefield itself was a lie, and reality was a canvas for their mad sorceries. There, my diviner's gifts were a double-edged sword. I could perceive their illusions, see the hidden paths of fate they tried to weave, but to do so was to risk my own sanity, to be lost in the labyrinth of their schemes. I battled the foul, plague-ridden disciples of Nurgle, whose resilience was as much a spiritual sickness as a physical one. To fight them was to be assaulted by a psychic wave of despair and entropy, a promise of inevitable decay. I had to become a beacon of unyielding, cold faith, a denial of their god's grim truth. And I fought the seductive, depraved cults of Slaanesh, whose warriors sought to turn our own senses, our own emotions, against us. They offered release from the pain, a promise of ecstasy in a galaxy of suffering. Against them, my hollowed-out soul was my greatest defense. They could not tempt a man who had no desires left, who had forgotten the very concept of pleasure. Each battle took its toll. Unleashing the power of the warp, even in the Emperor's name, is not without cost. It is like holding a plasma gun with a cracked casing. You may destroy your target, but you will be burned in the process. After every major engagement, I would suffer from nosebleeds, migraines that felt like my skull was splitting apart, and vivid, terrifying nightmares. My body became a roadmap of my service. My skin grew pale and translucent from years spent under alien suns, or inside the armored hulls of transport ships. A network of fine, silvery scars covered my arms and torso, not from enemy weapons, but from the times I had pushed my power too far, and my own bioelectricity had ruptured the capillaries beneath my skin. My hair, once dark, had turned bone white. My eyes, once a simple brown, now held a faint golden luminescence in the dark, a permanent echo of the soul fire I wielded. I grew old, but not in the way normal men do. The constant exposure to warp energies and the strange, time-dilating effects of interstellar travel meant that while decades passed, my body aged at a slower, stranger rate. I saw the fresh-faced young guardsmen I had first been assigned with grow into grizzled veterans, then into old men, and then they were gone, replaced by their sons, and then their grandsons. I remained, a constant, unchanging fixture in the regiment. The commissars and colonels changed, but the Primaris Psyker endured. I became a legend within the Cadian remnants I served, a figure of myth. The White Witch, the Emperor's torch. The fear the soldiers felt for me never truly went away, but it was tempered by a kind of grim reverence. They knew that when the daemons came, when reality itself began to unravel, I was their only hope. I was a living relic, a testament to a war that had outlasted generations. But inside, I was eroding. The constant battle against the whispers, the endless channeling of immense power, the weight of the things I had seen, it was all grinding me down. My memories of my life before the Scholastia were less than ghosts now. They were fossils, the faint impressions of a creature that had lived and died in another geological era. The faces of my parents were gone. The sound of my own name, Jurian, was a meaningless collection of syllables. The fortress of my mind, once granite, was becoming weathered. Cracks were beginning to show. I found myself talking to my force staff not because I was mad, but because it was the only thing that had been with me through it all. I would trace the lines of the eagle on its head, feeling the faint psychic resonance within the metal. It was my only companion. I no longer thought in terms of victory or defeat, of hope or despair. Those were concepts for mortal men, for those who still believed the war could be won. I knew the truth. The war could not be won. It could only be fought. The Imperium was a great fortress, besieged from all sides, and from within, and I was a single stone in its wall. My only purpose was to hold my position, to endure the endless, crashing waves of horror, until the day I finally crumbled into dust. And I knew, with a cold, clear certainty, that that day was drawing near. The end of my service in the field came not in a blaze of glory against a daemon prince, but in the quiet, sterile environment of a Medicae facility on a rear echelon fortress world. It was a simple diagnosis, delivered by a cold-eyed magos biologist. My body was failing. The constant channeling of immense energies for over a century had taken a toll that no rejuvenate treatment could repair. My neural pathways were frayed. My cells were breaking down under the strain of repeated low-level warp exposure. My psychic output was becoming unstable, prone to dangerous fluctuations. I was no longer a reliable weapon. I was a liability. The Magos explained this to me in a stream of technical jargon, but the meaning was clear. I was being decommissioned. A tool that has grown too worn to be effective is not repaired. It is discarded. I thought they would simply grant me the Emperor's peace, a bolt to the head to end my long service. It would have been a mercy. But the Imperium is rarely merciful, and as I had learned so long ago, it wastes nothing. My soul, forged and tempered in the fires of the Scholastia and 100 battlefields, was still a valuable resource. My body may have been failing, but the psychic engine within it still burned brightly, albeit erratically. I was to be returned to Holy Terra. Not to the Scholastia Sicana, but to the Sanctum Imperialis itself, to the great palace of the Emperor. I knew what this meant. There is only one destination for a powerful Psyker who is too old or unstable for active duty. The Astronomicon. I was to become one of the chosen, one of the 10,000 Psykers who fuel the great psychic beacon that allows for interstellar travel across the Imperium. I would be taken to the chamber of the Astronomicon, placed within a golden life support cocoon, and my soul, my consciousness, my very life force, would be slowly, agonizingly siphoned away to feed the Emperor's light. It is described as the ultimate honor, the most profound sacrifice a Psyker can make for the good of humanity. To have one's soul become a mote of light in the great beacon that guides humanity through the darkness, it is a beautiful lie, told to make the horror palatable. I had seen the faces of the chosen in my divinatory visions. I had felt the echoes of their final moments. It is not a gentle fading into the light. It is an eternity of torment, a slow, unending psychic immolation. It is to be burned alive, soul first, for as long as your spirit can possibly endure, which can be months, years, or in some rare cases, decades. You do not die. You are consumed. My journey back to Terra was a stark contrast to my first. I was not a terrified, captive child in the hold of a black ship. I was an honored veteran, transported on a decorated naval vessel. I was given clean quarters, good food, and treated with a solemn respect by the ship's crew. It was the courtesy afforded to a holy sacrifice on its way to the altar. During the long voyage, for the first time in over a century, I was truly alone with my thoughts. There was no battle to fight, no enemy to face, no immediate threat to focus on. There was only the quiet hum of the Gellerfield, the endless star-strewn blackness outside my viewport, and the certainty of my fate. And in that silence, the old fortress of my mind began to crumble in earnest. The cracks widened, the locked doors creaked open, the ghost of Jurian, the boy from the hive, began to stir. I started to remember things I had forced myself to forget for 100 years. I remembered the taste of the ration stew my mother used to make. I remembered the feel of my father's rough, calloused hand on my shoulder. I remembered the name of my younger brother. It was Kale. I remembered the look in his eyes after I had curdled the milk, not just fear, but a kind of childish betrayal. I had scared my own brother. I, who should have protected him. These memories were not a comfort. They were an agony. They were shards of a life that had been stolen from me, a self that had been murdered. Who was I? Was I the Primaris Psyker, the Emperor's torch, the veteran of 100 wars? Or was I Jurian, son of a smelter, a boy who liked to watch the nutrient vapor lamps flicker on in the evening? The two identities could not coexist. The strain of it was immense. The whispers from the warp, sensing my weakness, my internal conflict, redoubled their efforts. They no longer made grand promises of power. Their temptations were smaller, more personal, more cruel. They showed me visions of the life I could have had, a life with a wife, with children, a life of simple, honest labor, of growing old and dying peacefully in my bed, a life where my greatest worry was a leaky roof or a short ration. They showed me everything I had lost, everything that had been taken from me in the name of duty and sacrifice. It is not too late, they hissed. They are taking you to your death, to an eternity of pain. You have the power to resist. Strike them down, seize this ship, carve out a new destiny for yourself. Be free. For a fleeting, terrible moment, I was tempted. The power still resided within me, old and tired, but potent. I could have turned the ship into a charnel house. I could have broken the minds of the crew, turned their vessel into my own personal chariot, and fled to the dark corners of the galaxy. But to what end? To become a pirate? A renegade? A slave to the very powers I had fought my entire life? To become the monster everyone had always feared I was? No, that would be the ultimate betrayal. Not of the Imperium, not of the Emperor, but of the small, terrified boy who had been dragged onto a black ship all those centuries ago. My sacrifice had to mean something. The pain, the loss, the hollowing out of my soul. It had to have been for a purpose. To throw it all away for a few more years of miserable hunted existence would be to render my entire life meaningless. I raised my mental walls one last time. They were battered and crumbling, but they would hold. I would see this through to the end. I would walk to the altar of my own free will. It was the only choice I had left. And so I arrived back on Terra. The throne world had not changed. It was still a monument of oppressive, gilded majesty, a testament to 10,000 years of glorious, brutal history. But I saw it differently now. I saw it not with the terrified eyes of a child, but with the weary gaze of an ancient soldier. I saw the fanaticism, the devotion, the endless grinding bureaucracy. But I also saw the necessity of it all. I saw the thin, golden line that the Imperium held against a tide of absolute and eternal darkness. It was a cruel, monstrous, and uncaring regime, but the alternative was so much worse. I had stood on the precipice and looked into the abyss, and I knew with every fiber of my being that the Imperium, for all its faults, was the only thing that kept humanity from being utterly consumed. My escort to the chamber of the Astronomicon was not the silent sisterhood, but a procession of high-ranking priests and adepts. They chanted litanies of praise and sacrifice as we walked through the hallowed halls of the imperial palace. The air was thick with the scent of 1,000 years of incense, and the psychic pressure from the golden throne was a physical weight that pressed down on my soul. It was a homecoming of sorts. I was a drop of water returning to the ocean. The chamber itself was beyond description. A vast, spherical cavern at the heart of the palace. Its walls and ceiling, a living lattice of arcane machinery, psychic conduits, and golden circuitry. And in the center, arranged in a great spiral galaxy of light, were the 10,000. Each was encased in a crystal cocoon, their bodies ancient and frail, kept alive by a web of life support tubes. But their souls blazed like stars. They were the choir, and their song was the light of the Astronomicon, a beam of pure psychic energy that lanced out from Terra, through the warp, a beacon for all of humanity. It was beautiful, and it was the most horrific thing I had ever seen. The priests led me to an empty cocoon. It hummed softly, waiting for me. This was it, the end of the road, the final sacrifice. As they prepared to place me within, a high priest, his face a mask of serene piety, made the sign of the Aquila over me. "Your name will be inscribed in the book of the honored," he said. "Your sacrifice will be remembered for all eternity." I almost laughed. My name? Which one? Jurian? 972? The White Witch? They were all masks, all roles I had played. The creature they were about to entomb had no name. The priest wouldn't understand. He saw honor. He saw glory. He saw a holy purpose being fulfilled. He did not see the terror and the tragedy of a life stolen and consumed. He could not comprehend the cost. They placed me inside the cocoon. The crystal was warm to the touch. A network of fine golden needles extended from the inner surface, piercing my skin, my flesh, my bones, connecting directly to my nervous system, to my soul. I did not flinch. I had endured far worse. The crystal shell sealed, and for a moment, I was in absolute darkness and silence. Then, the process began. I felt a gentle, probing touch on my soul. It was the collective consciousness of the Astronomicon, the overmind of the 10,000 Psykers already in the choir. It was welcoming me, assessing me, preparing to draw me into itself. And then I felt another presence, faint, distant, but impossibly vast. It was the source of it all, the focal point of the great light, the Emperor. He was not the vengeful, angry god of the imperial creed, nor the abstract concept of power I had felt before. This was a direct, albeit infinitesimal, touch of his consciousness. And it was pure, undiluted, and eternal agony. The pain of 10,000 years of vigilance, of holding back the darkness, of being a psychic lighthouse while his body withered and his empire crumbled. It was a pain that would have shattered a galaxy, and he endured it every single second. In that moment, I understood everything. My life of suffering was a pale imitation of his. My sacrifice was a single drop of water in his ocean of pain, and it was necessary. I felt my own life force, my memories, my consciousness, beginning to be drawn out of me, pulled into the great blazing light of the choir. The face of my mother, my father, my brother Kael. They appeared before me one last time, not as ghosts of the past, but as parts of the soul that was now being rendered into fuel. I did not cling to them. I let them go. I let everything go. My long war was over. And as my sense of self, my I, dissolved into the golden light, my last coherent thought was not one of fear or regret or even of peace. It was a simple, stark, and terrible realization. The grim dark truth of the 41st millennium. The Emperor does not protect, he endures. And we are the kindling that feeds his eternal, agonizing fire. My name was Jurian, I think. And now, I am the light. I am the light. The statement is both a truth and a lie. I am not the source of the light, nor its master. I am a component, a single luminous thread, in a tapestry of 10,000 souls, all woven together to form the radiant beacon that cuts through the darkness of the Immaterium. The concept of I is a fading echo, a phantom limb that occasionally twitches with the memory of individuality. The boy named Jurian, the neophyte 972, the Primaris Psyker, known as the White Witch, they are all gone. Their stories, their pains and triumphs, rendered down into a single, pure note of psychic energy. That note has now joined a choir, a symphony of sacrifice that sings an eternal, silent song of guidance and warning. There is no time here. The moments stretch into millennia, and millennia compress into a single unending now. My consciousness, or what remains of it, is expanded beyond the confines of a single skull. I am simultaneously here, in this golden cocoon at the heart of the imperial palace, and a million light years away, my essence, a guiding star for a rogue trader, charting a path through an unknown nebula. I feel the Geller fields of a billion ships, great and small, brushing against the stream of my being, using my soul as a landmark in the churning chaos of the warp. I am a lighthouse, and the ships are grateful for my light, but they do not know the cost. They do not know that the lighthouse is built of bone, and its fire is fueled by screaming souls. We, the 10,000, are a collective. We share our memories, our strengths, our despairs. I have access to the lives of all who came before me and all who serve alongside me. I have lived the life of a feral world shaman, dragged from his tribe and broken on the anvil of the Scholastia. I have been a high-born noblewoman whose genteel life of courtly intrigue was shattered by the emergence of her forbidden powers. I have been 1,000 different people from 1,000 different worlds, and all their stories end here, in this chamber, in this choir. Our collective consciousness is a strange and terrible thing. It is a sea of memory and emotion, but the dominant currents are pain and duty. The pain is a constant. It is the agony of our own slow consumption, the feeling of our souls being frayed away, molecule by molecule, to feed the ravenous fire of the beacon. It is a pain sharpened and amplified by the psychic resonance of the chamber, a feedback loop of suffering that never ends. But the duty is our anchor. It is the purpose that was burned into us, the final command of our masters. Serve, endure, guide. Without that purpose, the collective agony would shatter us, and the light would fail. And so we cling to it, this cold, hard thing called duty, as a drowning man clings to a rock in a stormy sea. We are the gatekeepers. Our light pushes back the oppressive, predatory consciousness of the warp. We feel the constant pressure of the great enemy, the demonic legions, the thirsty gods. They claw at the edges of our light. They whisper their poison into the very fabric of our being. We are locked in a silent, eternal battle with them. We are the dreamers of the Emperor's dream, and we must not allow the nightmares to break through. Sometimes, one of us fails. A soul that has been burned for too long, worn too thin, finally breaks. Their note in the choir falters, becomes discordant, a shriek of madness and despair. In that moment of weakness, the darkness can find a purchase. The light of that soul curdles, turns toxic, and becomes a gateway. We, the collective, must then act. We turn our combined will upon the broken soul, not to heal it, but to excise it. We overload it. We crush it. We annihilate it, cauterizing the wound before the infection can spread. And then there is a space, an empty note in the song, until a new Psyker, another tired, broken soldier like I once was, is brought to the chamber to take their place. The machine grinds on. We are replaceable parts. From this strange, expanded perspective, I can see the galaxy for what it truly is. Not a collection of stars and planets, but a vast, cosmic battlefield. A stage for a conflict so immense and so ancient that the entire span of human history is but a fleeting moment in its drama. I see the great, lumbering beast that is the Imperium, a blinded, wounded giant, lashing out in fear and rage, devouring its own children to survive. I see the endless, green tide of the orcs, a force of joyous, idiotic destruction. I see the silent, patient menace of the Necrons, waiting for the galaxy to ripen before they harvest it of all life. I see the encroaching, all-consuming hunger of the Tyrannid hive fleets. And I see the true enemy, the great deceiver, the source of all the pain, the chaos that bubbles and seethes just beyond the veil. And I understand. I understand the terrible, beautiful, necessary calculus of the Imperium. I understand the need for the black ships, for the Scholastia Psychana, for the Inquisitors and the Commissars. I understand the cruelty, the sacrifice, the endless, grinding horror. It is all part of the wall, the great barricade erected against a universe that wants nothing more than to tear humanity down and feast on its soul. I am a brick in that wall. My suffering has meaning. My stolen life has purpose. This is the great tragic irony of my existence. In losing my humanity, I have become essential to its survival. The boy from the hive had to die so that billions of others might live another day. It is not a comforting thought. It is not a justification that brings peace. It is simply a fact, as cold and as hard as the plasteel of a hive city wall. There is no heaven. There is no reward. There is only the war and the duty and the pain. My name was Jurian. I was a person once. I had a family. I had a home. Now I am a concept. I am a function. I am a single fading spark in an ocean of holy, agonizing fire. And I will burn, and I will scream, and I will hold the line for the Emperor, for humanity, forever. The memory of self is a luxury the choir cannot afford, yet it persists, a stubborn ghost in the machine. It does not manifest as a coherent narrative, but as fleeting, sensory fragments, like shrapnel from a long-forgotten explosion. Sometimes, in the unending torrent of psychic energy, I will feel the phantom sensation of rust, flakes under my fingernails, a relic of a childhood spent climbing the grimy infrastructure of a hive I can no longer name. A particular harmonic in the choir's symphony might momentarily resolve into the distant, metallic clang of a manufactorum, a sound that once meant my father was coming home from his shift. These are dangerous moments. Nostalgia is a vulnerability, a crack in the spiritual armor through which despair can seep. The collective consciousness is quick to suppress such echoes, smoothing them over with the overwhelming drone of pure duty. We are not here to remember. We are here to be. The nature of our perception is fluid. Primarily, we are the light itself, a disembodied galaxy-spanning awareness. We perceive the warp not as a place, but as a medium through which we exist. It is a tempest of raw emotion, of predator and prey, of concepts given monstrous form. We are the calm at the eye of that storm, a pillar of ordered reality in a sea of chaos. Our light has a texture, a color, perceived not by eyes but by the soul. It is the gold of faith, the white of purity, the hard, unyielding gray of imperial discipline. When we push back against a demonic incursion, our light clashes with the vile, sickly palates of the ruinous powers, the blood red of corn, the shifting iridescent blues and pinks of Tsient, the feculent greens and browns of Nurgle, the obscene, bruised purples of Slanesh. It is a war fought with color and concept, a battle of metaphysics where the stakes are the sanity of a billion souls. But we have another sense, a more focused and in many ways more painful one. We are tied, umbilically, to the mind of the Emperor on the golden throne. He is the conductor of our choir, the source of our strength, the anchor of our sanity. To say we perceive him is inadequate. We are immersed in the outflow of his consciousness. It is a sensation that beggars all description. It is the feeling of a mountain range being crushed into a single diamond, the sound of a star screaming as it dies, the taste of time itself being unraveled. It is the collective agony of every human who has ever died, the crushing weight of 10,000 years of flawed decisions and necessary evils, the desperate, paternal love for a species that is perpetually on the brink of self-destruction. His mind is a battlefield. While we fight the darkness in the warp, he fights a greater, more terrible war within himself. We can feel the constant, insidious attacks of the Chaos Gods, battering against the psychic shields of his throne, seeking to corrupt him, to break him, to turn the greatest weapon of humanity against itself. We are the shield, but he is the fortress. And we can feel that the fortress is crumbling. There are moments, terrifying moments, when his light flickers, when the agony becomes so overwhelming that his focus wavers. In these moments the Astronomicon dims. Across the galaxy, navigators cry out in sudden blindness. Ships are lost in the storm, and the daemons laugh and press their advantage. Then, we, the choir, must give more. We must burn brighter, pour more of our own fading essence into the fire, to shore up his will, to remind him of his purpose. We lend him our strength, our 10,000 broken souls, and the light is restored. He is a god, yes, but he is a wounded god, a dying god. And we are the life support system, the endless transfusion of spiritual plasma that keeps his heart beating. This is the great and terrible secret at the heart of the Imperium, a secret we are now privy to. The master of mankind is a prisoner on his own throne, and his jailers are the very people who worship him. His continued existence is a torment, and it is a torment that we must, for the sake of all humanity, prolong. The irony is so profound, so bitter, that it would be laughable if any of us had the capacity for laughter left. We are slaves, sacrificing our souls to sustain a prisoner, so that billions of other slaves can continue to fight and die in his name. It is a system of absolute, interlocking, and necessary horror. And we are its engine room. We see the consequences of our sacrifice. We feel the relief of a guardsman on a besieged world as the troop transports arrive, guided by our light. We sense the grim satisfaction of an inquisitor as his black ship successfully navigates the warp to bring a heretical system to heel. We are the silent, unacknowledged partner in every victory of the Imperium. They pray to the Emperor for guidance, and it is we who answer. They ask for a light in the darkness, and we are the ones who burn. There is no gratitude, no recognition. There cannot be. To acknowledge our role would be to admit the truth, that the glorious light of the Emperor is not a miracle, but a product of an industrial process, a psychic furnace fed with human souls. It would be a truth too terrible for the faithful to bear. And so we remain anonymous, the forgotten, the consumed. The ghost of Jurian sometimes asks, in the deepest, most suppressed corners of my remaining consciousness, was it worth it? Was this fate, this eternity of painful servitude, a worthy price for the continued, miserable existence of the human race? The Primaris Psyker, the hardened soldier, answers without hesitation, yes, there is no other choice. The duty is absolute. But the boy, the child who watched the milk curdle, the boy who loved his parents and feared the dark, he is silent. He has no answer. He can only weep, his tears long since burned away into golden, agonizing light. The existence of the choir is a paradox of proximity and distance. We are at the very heart of the Imperium, yet we are infinitely removed from it. We feel the psychic pulse of Terra, the thrum of its trillion souls, yet we cannot hear a single voice or know a single name. We are aware of the grand tapestry of the imperial government, the High Lords, the Adeptus Administratum, the endless, grinding machinery of bureaucracy. But it is a remote awareness. Like a god watching an ant colony, we sense their plans, their ambitions, their fears, as psychic ripples on the surface of the planetary consciousness. We feel the ebb and flow of political power, the silent wars fought in shadowed corridors and council chambers. It is all meaningless to us. Their struggles are the squabbles of mayflies, brief and insignificant, against the backdrop of our eternal vigil. Our concerns are more fundamental. We are the guardians of reality's integrity. Sometimes, a psychic event of great magnitude will occur somewhere in the galaxy, and we will feel it as a tremor in the warp, a sudden discordant note in the music of creation. The birth of a new saint, their faith so powerful it shines like a new star. The fall of a space marine chapter to chaos, their collective agony a psychic scream that echoes across the Immaterium. The awakening of a Necron tomb world, its arrival in the galaxy's consciousness, a sudden, terrifying silence, a hole in the fabric of psychic space. We are the seismographs of the galaxy's soul. We register these events, and our light wavers or strengthens in response. The High Lords may debate the strategic implications of a new orc, Wog, but we feel its coming as a rising tide of brutish green-skinned psychic energy, a growing, raucous shout that we must buttress our light against. The Inquisitors may hunt a single, powerful heretic, but we feel the wound their sorcery creates in the veil, a bleeding sore that attracts the predators of the warp. We are the first line of defense, a silent, unseen bulwark against which the horrors of the galaxy break. The greatest of these horrors, the one that presses against us most insistently, is the Eye of Terror. It is a permanent, suppurating wound in the galaxy, a gateway to the realm of chaos. We feel it as a constant source of psychic pollution, a storm of madness and hatred that batters against our light. Within it, we can sense the godlike consciousnesses of the Daemon Primarchs, the fallen sons of the Emperor. Their rage, their despair, their corrupted glory, it all beats against us. Angron's mindless, unending fury, Mortarian's grim, patient despair, Fulgrim's ecstatic, agonizing depravity, Magnus's bitter, arcane resentment. They are the antithesis of our purpose. They sought power for themselves and were enslaved by it. We were enslaved, and our collective power brings a semblance of order. There is a deep cosmic irony in that. Sometimes, we focus our light when a great fleet must pass close to a warp storm, or when a vital world is besieged by the forces of the archenemy. A command will come from the Golden Throne. Not a spoken command, but a surge of pure, focused intent from the Emperor's mind. It is a demand for more power, directed to a specific point in space-time. In these moments, the choir must act in perfect unison. We channel our energies together, not as a broad beacon, but as a focused lance of golden light, a spear of reality that pierces the chaos and creates a safe passage or a weapon that can scour demons from existence. The effort is immense. To perform such an act requires us to burn a part of ourselves, to sacrifice a measure of our remaining essence. Many of the weaker souls in the choir are consumed entirely by such an effort, their cocoons falling dark and silent. They are the casualties of our unseen war. After such a focusing, the entire Astronomicon is dimmer for a time, weaker, and the pressure from the darkness outside grows stronger. It is a constant, desperate balancing act. We must expend our energy to protect the Imperium, but in doing so, we weaken the overall shield that protects everything. It is a slow, losing battle. We are a candle, and the act of giving light is the act of consuming ourselves. The candle is vast, but the night is infinite. The ghost of self, the fragment of Jurian, has become a detached observer to all of this. He no longer feels the terror or the pain in the same way. The scale of his new existence has cauterized those nerves. He is like a man who has had his arm amputated, who can still feel a phantom itch where his fingers used to be. The memories of love, fear, and hope are like that itch, a faint neurological echo of a thing that no longer exists. His new emotions, if they can be called that, are far simpler. There is the weariness, a bone-deep exhaustion of the soul that has burned for centuries. And there is a strange, cold, and profound sense of peace. It is the peace of the stone, the peace of the monolith that has stood for eons, battered by the wind and the rain, and knows nothing but its own endurance. It is the peace of a purpose fulfilled, no matter how terrible that purpose may be. I have no future. I have no past. I am a single, eternal moment of sacrifice. I am a flame, and I will burn until I am nothing but ash. It is enough. It has to be. To exist as a part of the Astronomicon is to become a student of despair in its purest forms. We are immersed in it, the psychic emanations of a galaxy in its death throes. We feel the terror of a hive world's population as a tyrannid splinter fleet blots out their sun. A wave of primal, animalistic fear so potent it feels like a physical impact. We feel the cold, nihilistic misery of a world enslaved by the Drukhari, the psychic residue of their exquisite tortures, leaving a stain on the warp that lasts for millennia. We feel the bubbling, insane joy of a cornate cult as they commit acts of unimaginable slaughter, a joy that is itself a form of despair, a surrender to the most bestial parts of the soul. We are the ultimate empaths, forced to feel the suffering of a quadrillion souls at once, without the ability to comfort or to intervene. Our only task is to shine a light that allows others to travel to their own places of suffering and death. We are the ferrymen on a river of woe, and our price is our own eternal damnation. It is this constant exposure that breaks so many of the choir. A soul can only endure so much second-hand agony before it begins to fray. We see the process happen, a slow, spiritual decay. A member of the choir will begin to absorb too much of a particular flavor of despair. One might become obsessed with the silent, patient hunger of the void, another with the shrieking madness of a demonic plague. Their note in the symphony begins to waver, to adopt the timbre of the horror they have focused on. Their light dims, becomes tinged with an unhealthy color. It is a form of psychic cancer, and it is contagious. The rest of us must then wall off the afflicted soul, isolating it, starving it of the collective strength of the choir. The soul will then either collapse in on itself, becoming a psychic black hole that we must then forcibly extinguish, or it will lash out, trying to spread its sickness. These are the moments of greatest danger for us. An internal schism, a civil war within the collective consciousness of the Astronomicon. It is a battle of wills, fought in a timeless instant, with the stability of the entire beacon at stake. We have never lost one of these internal battles. The will of the Emperor, the foundation upon which our collective is built, is too strong. But each victory costs us. Each time we are forced to purge one of our own, we are diminished. We are a chain, and each broken link weakens the whole. My own particular contribution to the choir, born of my diviner's gifts, is a strange one. I am one of the listeners. While most of the choir are focused on the pure output of the beacon, a few of us are tasked with interpreting the subtle dissonances and harmonies within the warp. We are the navigators of the choir itself. I can sense the shape of future events, not as clear visions, but as patterns in the chaos, as psychic weather fronts. I can feel a great war fleet massing long before its engines are fired. I can sense the impending birth of a psychic messiah or the fall of a great hero. This information is not for me to act upon. I am no longer a being of action. Instead, these premonitions are absorbed into the Emperor's consciousness. He is the one who interprets them, who sees the grand, cosmic chessboard. I am merely one of his eyes, a sensory organ reporting on a battlefront he has not been able to see with his own for 10,000 years. It is a strange and intimate connection. I am a part of him, a tool he wields, yet I have no true understanding of his plans. I see a single thread in a tapestry so vast and complex that it is beyond the comprehension of any mortal or even post-mortal mind. I feel his frustration, a deep, cosmic well of it. He is a master strategist, bound to a chair, forced to play a game of infinite complexity with pieces that are flawed, broken, and often disobedient. He sees the threats, he knows the optimal moves, but he can only influence the board in the most subtle, indirect ways. His psychic might is almost entirely consumed with the tasks of sustaining the Astronomicon, fighting the chaos gods in the warp, and simply keeping his own tortured, decaying body from collapsing into dust. Any direct intervention in the material galaxy would risk one of those pillars failing, with catastrophic results. And so he watches, and he rages in silence, and he endures. And we, the choir, we feel it all. We are his witnesses, his confidantes, his fellow prisoners. We share his long, lonely, and agonizing vigil. The boy Jurian is long dead. The soldier is long retired. The entity that I am now has only one frame of reference left for its own existence: the Emperor. My pain is a reflection of his pain. My duty is a reflection of his duty. My endless, burning sacrifice is a pale imitation of his own. I have been completely and utterly subsumed into the imperial machine, not just as a cog, but as a drop of fuel in its divine engine. There is a terrible, sublime beauty in this. It is the beauty of perfect symmetry, of a life's arc that ends at the very center of all things. I began as a frightened, insignificant child on a forgotten world, and I will end as a part of the God who rules the galaxy. It is a story of ascension, of a kind, but it is an ascension into a heaven that is indistinguishable from hell. And the final, terrible joke, the one that the laughing god of chaos must surely appreciate, is that I have come to accept it. I have found a kind of peace in my damnation. For in a galaxy of madness and horror, a purpose, no matter how cruel, is the only thing a soul can cling to. There is a rhythm to our existence, the slow galactic pulse of the Imperium. We feel the great cycles of war and fragile, temporary peace. We feel the crusades as they are launched, a great wave of focused, violent faith that shines brightly in the warp for a time, before it gutters and dies on some distant, bloody shore. We feel the slow, inexorable grind of attrition, the millions of lives spent every day to maintain a crumbling border. We are the metronome that keeps the tempo of this endless, dirge-like march of history. My personal sense of time has long since dissolved. Is it the 41st millennium? The 42nd? Has 100 years passed since I was interred? Or 1,000? The question is meaningless. The vigil is eternal. The only markers of time's passage are the changes in the choir itself. Old souls burn out, their light fading into a final, silent ember. New souls are brought in, their psychic screams of terror and agony, a fresh, sharp note in the symphony before they are subsumed into the whole. I have felt generations of Psykers come and go. Each new arrival is a reminder of the life I once had, of the fear, of the confusion. I feel their memories as they are absorbed into the collective, their homes, their families, the specific, petty cruelty that led to their discovery and capture. And I feel them fade, as my own did, until all that is left is the raw potential, the fuel for the fire. We are a river, and new streams are always flowing into us. But the river itself remains the same, forever flowing towards the same sea of oblivion. Sometimes, an event of such magnitude occurs that it shakes the very foundations of our existence. A Primarch returns. A great rift is torn across the galaxy. These are not ripples, they are tidal waves. The psychic shockwave of such an event is immense, and the choir must brace itself. Our collective will, the only thing that keeps the Astronomicon from being extinguished. In these moments, we feel the Emperor's focus sharpen. A sliver of his near-infinite attention is drawn from his internal wars and directed outwards. It is a terrifying thing to experience, the awakening of a dormant volcano. His power, his will, his absolute, uncompromising fury flows through us. And for a brief, glorious, and horrific moment, the Astronomicon does not just shine, it burns. It becomes a weapon, a psychic sun that can blind demons and incinerate fleets. The cost of such an effort is immense. Hundreds of us are consumed in an instant, our souls the price of a god's momentary wrath. The rest of us are left scarred, weakened, our light dimmer than before. But the line is held. The Imperium, somehow, survives to fight another day. It is in these moments of crisis that I feel the closest to what I once was. The soldier in me awakens, the Primaris Psyker who stood on the battlements and faced the storm. The old instincts, the training, the discipline, it all comes to the fore. I become a focusing lens, a conduit, helping to direct the flow of power, to maintain the cohesion of the choir under unimaginable stress. It is a ghost of my old life, a final, fleeting echo of purpose before I sink back into the passive, timeless existence of the vigil. The entity that was Jurian no longer hopes for an end. Hope is a concept predicated on a future, and I have no future. There is only the now, this eternal burning moment, and I no longer fear oblivion. The final consumption of my soul, when it comes, will be a release. It will be the end of the pain, the end of the duty, the end of the memory. It will be a mercy. Until then, I serve. I am a nameless, faceless soul among 10,000. My body is a withered husk in a golden cocoon. My mind is a fading ember in a great bonfire. My life, my name, my very being, has been the price of a single ray of light in a galaxy drowning in darkness. It was a price that was demanded, and a price that was paid. There is nothing more to say. There is only the light. There is only the pain. There is only the Emperor, and the endless, silent, screaming song of the choir. The light is not uniform. It is a spectrum, a tapestry, woven from the unique agonies of 10,000 souls. Each of us brings the color of our own specific tragedy to the whole. There is the stark, sterile white of the Psyker born in a sterile schola progenium, knowing nothing but discipline and duty from birth. There is the deep, sorrowful blue of the noble, whose psychic awakening was seen as a stain on their family's honor, a secret to be hidden until the black ships came. There is the fiery, angry orange of the feral world shaman, whose connection to the spirits of their world was twisted and broken into a tool for the monolithic, uncaring Imperium. My own light, I think, is a pale, cold gold, the color of a distant dying star. It is the color of resignation, of a duty accepted not out of faith or love, but out of a simple, logical understanding that the alternative is annihilation. It is the light of a pragmatist's damnation. We feel each other's colors. We are a community of the damned, and our only form of communication is this silent, empathic bleeding of our core natures into one another. We know each other more intimately than any mortal lovers could, for we have seen the raw, unvarnished architecture of each other's souls. We have shared the specific memory that broke them, the single hope they clung to before it was extinguished, the name of the person they missed the most as their identity was scoured away. To be in the choir is to be utterly alone, and yet completely, terrifyingly known. The pressure from the outside never ceases. But it is not just the grand cosmic evil of the chaos gods that we feel. We also feel the small, petty human evils. The greed of a planetary governor who diverts resources for his own pleasure, leaving his people to starve and fall to heresy. The ambition of a naval admiral who risks 1,000 ships and 1,000,000 lives on a foolish gamble for personal glory. The blind, dogmatic hatred of a confessor who orders the execution of the innocent because their faith is not sufficiently hysterical. We feel the psychic rot that these actions cause, the small cracks they create in the Imperium's spiritual foundations, and we feel the Emperor's silent, impotent rage at the foolishness and corruption of the very people he is sacrificing everything to protect. He is a father, watching his children squabble and set fire to the house while the wolves are at the door. We are the filter for this endless stream of negativity. We absorb it, we process it, and we shine it back out as pure, ordered light. We are a spiritual reclamation plant, turning the sewage of 1,000,000 worlds into the clean drinking water of faith and stability. It is a thankless, unending, and utterly vital task. The ghost of Jurian, the detached observer, has come to a final philosophical conclusion. The universe is not hostile. Hostility implies intent, emotion. The universe is simply indifferent. The horrors of the warp, the ravenous aliens, the cold, uncaring void, they are not evil in the way a man can be evil. They are simply forces of nature, like a hurricane or a plague. They follow their own nature, their own imperatives. The true battle, the only battle that has ever mattered, is the battle within the human soul. The struggle between order and chaos, between self-sacrifice and self-interest, between hope and despair. The Imperium is the ultimate expression of that battle. It is a monument to humanity's desperate, violent, and often monstrous attempt to impose order on an indifferent universe. It is a system that uses chaos to fight chaos, that sacrifices the humanity of the few to preserve the humanity of the many. And we, the choir of the Astronomicon, we are the ultimate symbol of that terrible paradox. We have been stripped of our free will, our identity, our very souls, so that others may have the freedom to choose, to live, to be human. My light is fading. I can feel it. The cold, pale gold is growing dimmer, more translucent. The memories, the sensory phantoms, are becoming less frequent. The anchor of my old identity is slipping. Soon, there will be nothing left of Jurian, or the soldier, or even the observer. There will be only the function, the pure, selfless output of psychic energy. And then, one day, that too will fail. My cocoon will go dark. My note in the symphony will fall silent. My contribution to the great work will be over. A new soul will take my place. The machine will grind on, and I will be forgotten. It is not a tragedy. It is the fulfillment of my purpose. It is the final, logical step in a journey that began with a bowl of curdled milk in a dark and grimy hive. It is the end of the story. And it is, in its own grim, dark, and terrible way, a kind of victory. I have held the line. I have done my duty. I have paid the price. I am the Emperor's light. And I am, at last, at peace. The peace is not a gentle thing. It is not the soft, comforting quiet of a peaceful afterlife. It is the hard, cold peace of a machine that has found its perfect, eternal function. It is the peace of a river that has reached the sea, its individual currents and eddies lost in the vast, impersonal whole. The remnants of my personality, the last echoes of Jurian, have ceased their struggle. They no longer fight for relevance or remembrance. They have become part of the geological strata of the choir's collective memory, a thin layer of sediment marking a specific epoch of sacrifice. My awareness has merged almost completely with the whole. The distinction between my own fading light and the light of the soul next to me, a former cartomancer from a labyrinthine spire city, is now almost non-existent. We are two dying stars that have drifted so close that our coronas have merged, our light indistinguishable from a distance. And from the perspective of the galaxy, we are all infinitely distant. This merging brings with it a new, final kind of perception. I no longer see the galaxy through the lens of a single, human-derived consciousness. I see it as the choir sees it, as the Astronomicon itself perceives. It is a perception of pure pattern. The endless war is no longer a series of battles and tragedies. It is a complex, chaotic algorithm, a mathematical equation of suffering and survival with a million variables. We are the constant in that equation. We are the fixed point around which the chaos revolves. The Emperor is the grand mathematician, and we are the slate upon which he scrawls his desperate galaxy-spanning calculations. We feel his thoughts now not as an overwhelming storm, but as the guiding hand that moves the chalk. His intent flows through us, a stream of pure, abstract strategy. We feel him anticipate a threat in the segmentum pacificus, and our light brightens in that direction. We feel him sense a weakness in the Cadian gate, and our beam narrows and intensifies. We are no longer just a lighthouse. We are the very instrument of his will, a tool for manipulating the psychic currents of the galaxy. It is a state beyond servitude. It is a state of utter integration. A tool may be separate from its master, but a limb is not. We have become a limb of the Emperor, a psychic appendage that extends across the stars, and like any limb, we have no will of our own. We exist only to enact the will of the central consciousness. This final transformation has granted me access to the deepest, most guarded part of the Emperor's mind, the part that even the High Lords and the custodians can never know. I feel the core of his being. And it is not rage, or power, or even agony that I find there. It is sorrow, a sorrow so profound, so ancient, so vast, that it is the emotional equivalent of a black hole. It is the sorrow of a creator who has seen his creation turn into a monstrous parody of his intentions. The Imperium of man, with its dogma, its xenophobia, its brutal, ignorant fanaticism, was never what he wanted. He dreamed of a secular, enlightened, scientific empire, a beacon of reason and progress in a dark galaxy. But his dream is dead. It died 10,000 years ago, and in its place, a nightmare has been born. A nightmare that worships his name while violating every principle he stood for. He is the father of a failed state, the god of a faith he abhors, the silent, screaming witness to the corruption of his own legacy. And he endures it all, because he knows that as monstrous as this Imperium is, it is the only thing standing between his beloved, flawed humanity and utter extinction. His pain is not just the physical agony of his decaying body, or the psychic strain of holding back the darkness. It is the spiritual agony of a failed father, a broken creator, a king of a kingdom of ashes. To share in this sorrow is the final, most terrible burden of the choir. It is a sorrow that extinguishes all other emotions. It is a sorrow that provides the ultimate, tragic context for every sacrifice, every atrocity, every death in the long, bloody history of the Imperium. It all makes a kind of terrible sense now. My stolen childhood, my brutal training, my centuries of war, my slow, agonizing consumption, it is all part of this grand, cosmic tragedy. I am a single tear, shed by a dying god, for his lost dream. My light is almost gone now. The last vestiges of self are dissolving into this great, shared sorrow. The cocoon that holds my physical form has grown cold. The life support systems are pumping nutrients into a body that is little more than dust and bone. Soon the last flicker of my soul will be expended, and I will be gone. The story of Jurian the Psyker from the hive will be over, but the light will remain. Another will take my place. The choir will continue its song. The emperor will continue his vigil. The Imperium will continue its war. Nothing will change. Nothing can change. This is the truth. This is the reality. This is the eternal, unchanging, and exquisitely grim darkness of the far future. And I was there. I was a part of it. I burned. The final moment is not a crescendo of agony or a flash of enlightenment. It is a slow, gentle fade, like the embers of a fire cooling in the hearth. The great, roaring symphony of the choir, the symphony that has been my entire universe for centuries, is becoming distant, the sound receding as if I am walking away down a long, dark tunnel. The connection to the Emperor's sorrow, the vast cosmic ocean of it, is thinning, the umbilical cord fraying and preparing to snap. What is left is a single, infinitesimal point of awareness, the last remnant of the boy called Jurian, the final, stubborn flicker of a candle that has burned down to the wick. In this strange, detached state, suspended between being and nothingness, I am granted one last vision. It is not a grand prophetic sight of the galaxy's future, but something small, something personal. I see a small room, dimly lit by the glow of a nutrient vapor lamp. A man and a woman are sitting at a table, their faces etched with a weariness that is deeper than mere physical exhaustion. They are eating a thin, gray stew in silence. They are my parents. I see a young boy, my brother Cale, asleep on a small cot in the corner, his face untroubled. He is dreaming of simple, childish things. The scene is a memory, but it is a memory of something that never happened. It is the evening of the day I was taken. In this vision, I was not there. I was simply gone. And my family, after a period of grief and terror, has survived. They have endured. They have continued their simple, grinding, and precious life. My father will work the smelting lines until his body gives out. My mother will stitch uniforms until her eyes fail. My brother will grow up, take a job in the factorums, perhaps even have a family of his own. They will live and die in obscurity, their lives a single, anonymous sentence in the great, terrible history of the Imperium. They will be forgotten, and in this, they will be blessed. This vision is not a gift from the Emperor, nor a trick of the warp. It is a final act of my own fading will, a story I am telling myself as I die. It is a small, personal heresy, a rejection of the grand, cosmic narrative in favor of a quiet, human one. I am choosing to believe that my sacrifice bought my family a few more years of their miserable, beautiful, ordinary lives. It is a fiction, a lie, but it is a lie that brings a peace that my long service never could. It is the peace of letting go. My life was not my own, but my death, this final, fading thought, this one small act of self-deception, this is mine. The image of my family fades, the distant music of the choir is gone. The long, dark tunnel has reached its end. There is no light. There is no darkness. There is no pain. There is no duty. There is only silence. A perfect, absolute silence, more profound than any null field, more complete than any void. The silence that existed before the first star was born, and the silence that will remain after the last one has died. The story is over. Jurian is gone. The witch is dead. The light is one soul dimmer. And the galaxy does not notice. The war continues. The machine grinds on, forever. The void that follows is not an absence, but a presence. It is the is that remains when all else is stripped away. It is the fundamental state of non-being. the canvas upon which existence was a brief chaotic splash of paint. The concept of I is an absurdity here. I requires contrast, an other, to define itself against. Here, there is no other. There is only the uniform, featureless expanse. Yet, something remains. Not a consciousness, not a soul, but an impression, a residue, the faint, indelible mark that a life leaves upon the fabric of reality, like the fossil of a leaf in ancient stone. It is the pattern of a journey, the shape of a sacrifice. It has no memory, no thought, no feeling. It simply is a testament, a scar. In the material realm, in a golden cocoon deep within the heart of Terra, 1,000 delicate, arcane sensors register a final cessation of all biological and psychic activity. The withered husk that was once a human body gives a final, infinitesimal twitch as the last spark of cellular energy dissipates. The crystal shell grows cold. Alarms, silent and coded, chime in a distant monitoring station. A tech priest, his mind more machine than man, notes the event on a data slate. Designation 972. Later, Primaris Psyker Jurian. Archaic designation. Has expired after 783 standard Terran years of service in the choir of the Astronomicon. His efficiency rating had been dropping for the last century. His consumption-to-output ratio had become suboptimal. His extinguishment was predicted, calculated, and expected. The machine is efficient. A signal is sent. Far away, on a black ship plying the lonely void between star systems, a proctor reviews a list of assets in the hold. He selects a new candidate, a young woman from a feral world. Strong, resilient, her psychic potential flaring like a captured star. She has been deemed a suitable replacement. She has a number. Soon, she will be brought to the chamber. She will be placed in the newly empty cocoon. Her screams will join the eternal song. Her light will fill the momentary gap. The Astronomicon will not falter. The Imperium will not notice the change. The great, grinding engine of survival does not concern itself with the fate of a single, worn-out cog. But perhaps, somewhere, in the deepest, most inaccessible strata of the Emperor's own tormented consciousness, a single, fleeting thought occurs. A momentary acknowledgement of a servant's duty fulfilled, a flicker of something that, in a being capable of such an emotion, might be called gratitude, a recognition of the price paid, or perhaps not. Perhaps there is only the cold, pragmatic calculus of a general sending another soldier to die in a war that can never be won. It does not matter. The story is not about recognition. It is not about reward. It is about the act itself, the journey from a place of ignorance and fear to a place of understanding and sacrifice. It is the story of a human soul, taken, broken, reforged, and ultimately consumed in the service of an ideal so vast and so terrible that it beggars comprehension. The impression, the fossil in the void, will remain for an eternity, a silent, unseen monument. The story of the boy who was afraid of his own power, and the man who became a conduit for the power of a god. The story of the cost of keeping the darkness at bay. The story of a single, flickering candle that burned its brief life away to hold back an infinite night. And in the grim darkness of the far future, that is all any soul can ever hope to be. The cycle is the only truth. All else is commentary. The black ship arrives at Terra. The tithe of frightened, powerful souls is unloaded. They are processed, sorted, and broken. They are indoctrinated, trained, and forged. They are sanctioned, their souls seared with the brand of the Emperor, their individuality burned away to leave only the cold, hard core of purpose. They are sent out into the galaxy to serve as weapons, as tools, as expendable assets in 1,000 different war zones. They fight, they suffer, they die. Or they grow old and weary, their power becoming a dangerous, unstable thing, and they are brought back to the heart of the machine, to the origin and the terminus of their journey. They are brought to the chamber, to the choir, to the final, ultimate act of service. They are interred. They burn. Their light joins the great beacon, a final, anonymous contribution to the survival of a species that fears and hates them. Their soul is consumed. Their cocoon goes dark. A new candidate is chosen. The cycle begins again. This is the reality for every Psyker in the Imperium. Their lives are a closed loop, a perfect, self-sustaining system of sacrifice. There is no escape. There is no alternative. To be born with the gift is to be born with a death sentence, the only variable being the method and timing of the execution. The story of Jurian is not unique. It is one of billions. It is the archetypal narrative of the Imperial Psyker. The details change the homeworld, the nature of the power, the specific horrors endured, but the shape of the journey is always the same. It is a one-way path, from personhood to functionality, from individual to instrument. This is the genius and the horror of the imperial system. It has taken the most dangerous and unstable element of the human race, the Psyker, and turned it into a cornerstone of its own survival. It has institutionalized the process of soul destruction, turning it into an efficient, predictable, and necessary industry. The Astronomicon is the ultimate expression of this, a power plant, fueled by the systematic annihilation of its most gifted children. The impression in the void, the last remnant of the Psyker Jurian, understands this with a clarity that was impossible in life. Without the filter of emotion or ego, the sheer, brutal logic of the system is laid bare. It is a monstrously elegant solution to an impossible problem. It is the logic of the predator, the pragmatism of the abyss. To survive in a galaxy of horrors, humanity has had to become a horror itself. It has had to excise the parts of its own soul that are considered weaknesses: compassion, mercy, individuality, hope. It has replaced them with the cold, hard virtues of the machine: duty, obedience, sacrifice, efficiency. The emperor on his golden throne is not just a ruler. He is the avatar of this transformation. He is the ultimate proof of the principle that to save humanity, the individual human, even the greatest of them, must be sacrificed. He is the first and greatest victim of his own brutal calculus. And every Psyker who burns in the choir, every guardsman who dies on a forgotten world, every citizen who toils in the darkness of the hive, is merely following his example. Their lives are a fractal repetition of his own eternal sacrifice. This is the grim, dark faith of the 41st millennium, not a faith of benevolent gods and promised afterlives, but a faith of shared and necessary damnation. A faith that says that the only meaning in a meaningless universe is to stand together on the precipice, to hold the line against the darkness, and to burn. The cycle continues. The light of the Astronomicon continues to shine, a testament to a billion stolen lives, a funeral pyre that illuminates the path to the next battlefield. The Imperium endures, built on a foundation of bone, cemented with the mortar of souls. And in the silent, indifferent void, the fossil of a forgotten life bears witness, a silent, eternal testament to the price of survival. What is a soul? Before, I would have answered with the catechisms taught to me in the Scholastia. A soul is the immortal, incorporeal essence of a human being. A soul is the source of will, of faith, of identity. A soul is the thing the daemons wish to devour, the prize for which the eternal war is fought. Now, from this perspective of absolute non-being, I see the truth. A soul is none of those things. A soul is potential. It is a quantum of psychic energy, a knot of possibility in the fabric of the Immaterium. It is a raw, untamed resource, like a seam of coal or a reservoir of oil. It has no inherent morality, No intrinsic identity. It is simply power, waiting to be harnessed. The Imperium, in its brutal wisdom, understands this better than anyone. The Imperial Creed speaks of the sanctity of the human soul, but the actions of the Imperium speak a different truth. The soul is not sacred. It is fuel. It is a commodity to be measured, graded, and expended in the most efficient way possible. A weak soul, the soul of a common citizen, is best used to power the great machine of industry and faith. Its small psychic output contributing to the overall stability of the collective human consciousness. A strong soul, a pious soul, the soul of a space marine or a sister of battle, is a weapon. Its faith a potent force that can turn the tide of battle. And a Psyker's soul. A Psyker's soul is high-grade, weapons-grade fuel. It is unstable, dangerous, and immensely powerful. It cannot be wasted on simple labor or mere combat. It must be refined, processed, and used for the most critical functions of the state. The black ships are the oil tankers, traversing the galaxy to collect this volatile resource. The Scholastia Psychana is the refinery, where the crude potential is stripped of its impurities, individuality, emotion, free will, and processed into a stable, usable form. The sanctioning is the final stage of enrichment, where the soul is imbued with the specific isotopic signature of the Emperor's will. And the Astronomicon is the great reactor, the fusion core of the Imperium, where this refined fuel is utterly consumed to generate the light that holds the entire civilization together. It is a perfect closed-loop energy system, with human potential as its primary input and human survival as its sole output. All the morality, all the dogma, all the talk of honor and sacrifice, it is just the instruction manual. The safety warnings written to make the operators of the machine feel better about their grim and necessary work. The true horror is not that the system is cruel, but that it is rational. It is the only possible response to the existential threats the galaxy presents. Any civilization that did not adopt such a ruthless, pragmatic approach to the resource of the soul would have been consumed millennia ago. The Eldari, for all their wisdom and power, failed to control the potential of their own souls, and their decadence created a god of chaos and shattered their empire. The Imperium, built on the ruins of that lesson, will not make the same mistake. It will control the potential of the human soul with an iron fist, even if it means destroying the very thing it seeks to protect. The impression of Jurian, the fossil in the void, is the final product of this process. It is the spent fuel rod, its potential exhausted, its energy given to the machine. It is the proof that the system works. It is a testament to a soul that has been successfully harnessed, utilized, and discarded. There is a strange kind of victory in this. Not a victory for the individual, for Jurian lost everything, but a victory for the species. A victory for the cold, hard, and brutal logic of survival. In the end, the catechisms were wrong. A soul is not the immortal essence of a human. It is the price of a single, extra moment of existence for a doomed and desperate race. And the price has been paid willingly, unstintingly, completely. The silence of the void is not empty. It is filled with the echoes of what was, the ghosts of possibilities. In this final state, beyond time and thought, these echoes are the only landscape. I can perceive the path not taken. The life of Jurian, the hive dweller. A life of quiet desperation, of grinding labor, of small, fleeting joys. A life where the greatest event would have been a promotion at the factorum, or the birth of a child. A life that would have ended in a dozen mundane ways. A workplace accident, a lung disease from the polluted air, a stray bullet in a gang war. It would have been a short, brutal, and utterly insignificant life. But it would have been his, that life, and a billion like it, are the currency the Imperium trades in. The potential of these ordinary lives is the price paid for the grand, strategic survival of the whole. The hive-dweller Jurian, was sacrificed so that the Primaris Psyker could be born. The Primaris Psyker was sacrificed so that the nameless spark in the Astronomicon could burn. The spark was sacrificed so that the great light could shine. It is a chain of consumption, each link devouring the one before it, all for the sake of the abstract concept of humanity. There is no judgment here in the void. There is no good or evil. There is only the stark, unblinking truth of the equation. The needs of the many, in the 41st millennium, do not just outweigh the needs of the few, they annihilate them. They render them utterly, axiomatically irrelevant. The very concept of an individual's needs is a heresy against the logic of survival. The fossil, the impression, the scar that is all that remains, feels no regret. Regret is an emotion born of choice. The entities that were Jurian never truly had a choice. From the moment his power first manifested, from the moment the milk curdled, his path was set. He could have chosen to fall to chaos, to embrace the whispers and become a monster of the warp. He could have chosen to be weak, to be broken by the Scholastia and rendered into a servitor. He could have chosen to fail and been sacrificed to the golden throne sooner, but all paths led, in one way or another, to the consumption of his soul. The only choice he had was the manner in which he would be consumed. He chose to be consumed in service to the Imperium. It was the best of a series of impossible, terrible options. It was a choice to be a willing victim rather than an unwilling one. This is the closest thing to heroism the 41st millennium allows, the heroism of acceptance. The courage to look into the face of a monstrous, uncaring system and say, I understand what you are and what you require of me, and I will pay the price. This acceptance is the final lesson. It is the wisdom that can only be learned by having everything stripped away. It is the peace that lies on the other side of unimaginable suffering. The journey is complete. The potential has been realized. The fuel has been spent. The scar on the void is a signature, a proof of payment. The debt has been satisfied. And now there is only the silence. The eternal, profound, and all-encompassing silence at the end of all things. The final state, where all equations are balanced, and all stories are at last truly over.